Hi, good morning. This is Bob Randall coming to you again for week 2 of our study of the Gospel according to Mark, using the materials from the Episcopal Church's Good Book Club. And today I want to pick up where I left you by telling you again that the parable of the sower in Mark chapter 4 is essential to understanding what Mark is actually doing. This parable is actually the only one that shows up in all of the synoptic gospels, and it's rare in Mark for Jesus to explain parables, unlike Matthew, where he often takes the disciples and explains. In our Zoom sessions, we talked about how verses 10 and 12 are so troubling to many that they want to eliminate it from Mark's gospel, but it actually fits so well for the message that I want to have us look at. 10 to 12 quotes Isaiah and talks about how it's almost purposeful that the meaning seems to be hidden. And then verses 13 through 20 give us as the readers the meaning of the parable and leaves it as the interpretive frame for what happens in all of Mark's gospel. Think about the images in this parable. The sower goes out to seed. He throws seed everywhere, but birds, sun, poor soil, weeds all inhibit the growth, in fact, kill off the growth. But for some, a few seeds are received into good soil, and they produce a harvest that's almost unimaginable. And think about what's been happening already in these first 6 chapters that we have through this week. Jesus has come into the world proclaiming the word, maybe sowing seeds, but it's a word that has been hard for many to hear. In fact, there are people who complain about what he has to say. Why does he come feasting when John the Baptist came fasting? Well, he claims to be Lord of the Sabbath. I mean, who can be so audacious to proclaim that he can violate the rules of the Sabbath? And why would he and his followers associate with unclean people? And even this week, his family even think that Jesus is out of his mind, as they say. Maybe some of us are old enough to remember in the 60s that humorous one, "They're coming to take me away, ha ha, ha ha." Jesus must have felt exactly the same when they show up and try to inhibit what he's doing. And he has to say, well, who is my family? Who gets the seed sown in good soil? That's one of the things that has been going on and why this parable is so informing of what Mark's gospel portrays. How is it being received and how is it being cultivated? And for us, maybe the question, just like it was for Jesus' disciples, is how can we become good soil? And what is it in our lives that chokes out the seed? What are the weeds that seem to be inhibiting growth? What are the birds that keep plucking away and taking away the seeds that Jesus wants to sow in our life? And he proclaims the good word, and he finishes the parable with, "Let anyone with ears to hear listen." And that's a word for all time, for Jesus' own time and for our time. But the question that often gets raised by people is, well, wait a minute, if some of it isn't going to be heard, does that mean we have a permanent misunderstanding? And Jesus goes and follows immediately up with, "For there is nothing hidden except to be disclosed." He talks about the lamp that should not be hidden under a basket, nor is anything secret, he says, except to come to light. The key here about a messianic secret is telling us that Silence and secrecy is a temporary strategy. Why would Jesus not want others to talk about what they are seeing and hearing is the obvious question. And as we will see, even the insiders, the disciples who follow Jesus and who are the beneficiaries of Jesus making explanation after explanation, they still get it wrong over and over again. One of the messages of Mark's gospel is, until the resurrection, it seems that we're almost incapable of understanding the true identity of Jesus and our own identity as followers of the way. At the end of the gospel, one of the questions will be, how do we interpret the very last scene in Mark's original gospel with the women running away in silence because they are afraid? Will they keep the lamp under the basket? The gospel, though, we learned from this parable and the parable of the lamp and the basket that follows, is that the good news has a direction. A telos is the Greek word. A telos, which is an end point that God intends, even if it is not evident all the time. The gospel has something for us to understand. After the telling of this parable, the battle with evil escalates, and Jesus starts crossing boundaries, which is very significant to the understanding the gospel has universal application. And so in chapter 4, we finish up with miracle of calming the storm. There's a miracle there that we often hear about because it follows in our regular lectionary, but there's more going on than simply calming a storm. It starts out by Jesus saying, "Let us go to the other side." He's going to leave the side of the Sea of Galilee, which is under Jewish control, and move to the other side, which is under Gentile control. Geography is often a clue to the message of the gospel. And while they are crossing the sea, Jesus is asleep in the boat while the storm comes up. And what might that say to you about Jesus and about our faith when it is tested? The disciples actually ask, "Do you not care? Do you not care that we are perishing?" And Jesus wakes and says, "Do you still have no faith?" The question really brings to mind that we've just been through 4 chapters of him showing who he is and showing that he does care about us, that in the times of sickness and illness and evil possession, Jesus has taken action to protect us. So when the disciples say, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" Jesus naturally responds, "What have I been showing you all this time? Do you still have no faith?" And then he calms the seas, he calms the storm, and the winds cease. And the disciples say, "Who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They now are getting, the clue is starting to take hold, we hope. And then it moves into one of my favorite scenes in all of Mark's gospel that is told as the longest story of exorcism in the gospels. Jesus, remember, is now in foreign territory, in Gentile land, and he's in a place where the question could naturally be, if he's out of his own territory, he's no longer within Jewish control, will his power still be as evident? Will it still be possible? And yet, in this Gentile story of the demoniac, the man who has been possessed by a legion full of demons, and in a land where Jesus takes the demons and throws them into the pigs, it's one of the most important stories, actually, even though a lot of people have trouble with it. There's a couple humorous sorts of things that scholars have pointed out. One is that he talks about the legion of demons, which is a large number which related to a battalion within the Roman army. And the fact that he throws the demons into the pigs, those two clues might lead us to believe that this became a favorite story for Jesus, or at least for his followers to tell, because a boar was the primary image on the shield of those Roman units. And so a legion and the boar on the shield, the pigs that are driven into the sea, might be favorites of the Jewish people who heard the story, who recognized they were in a land that was under the control of the Romans, and now the demons are being driven out and driven into pigs, and they drown in the sea, jump over the cliff. There's a possession of evil in this man that is important for us to recognize, one of the effects which makes it impossible to live in community. And then the other question is, do the townspeople actually see and understand? And the answer is no. After all, Jesus has just driven the source of their economy, the pigs, over the edge of the cliff. And now, what do when their economy has been crushed? They ask Jesus to get in the boat. You may have driven evil out of our town, but we don't like the way it's actually working out. So, as the story continues and goes on and on further, we see in these next passages, through the end of chapter 6, much more is happening. The healing of a woman with 12 years of hemorrhage and the healing of a 12-year-old girl. Remember how significant 12 is the next story within a story. In the very beginning introduction last week, I told you that Mark will use a technique called intercalation, or sandwiching one story in the middle of another one, interrupting a story with another that helps emphasize one particular part of the story. And here we see, especially in this healing, some really important messages about the frustration of ongoing chronic illnesses, and healing that is even more powerful than death, which is seen in the rising again of this girl. And also the key point of who gets healed. Does it require that you're the one who presents and has enough faith? The teaching at home when he goes back to Nazareth is very significant. After Jesus is teaching them and they've heard all about his healing and his miracles, what do they say? Where did this man get all this? This hometown boy is getting too big for his britches, and they try to throw him over the cliff. That's the reaction. And it says he can't do very many miracles there because of his town's unbelief. Although he's only able to heal a few sick people. If I could heal just a few sick people, I'd be very happy. It goes on to have John the Baptist lose his head in the longest telling in all of the Gospels about John the Baptist. The feeding of 5,000, which we can talk about in our Zoom, and walking on water. And it shows in story after story, Jesus is the one who has power over sickness, has the ability to expel demons, is the one who has the ability to calm the storms in our life and walk on water, to be able to do the thing that only God himself can do. And the question after all of that, from the disciples, after all those stories, is, who is this? It's that regular theme that we continue to see over and over again. So next week, we're going to get to the climax of the first half of the Gospel of Mark, and it's going to end on the Mount of Transfiguration. I invite you to our Zoom sessions on Thursday, one at 11, one at 7 in the evening. And in those times, come with your questions and your thoughts, and we'll talk. God bless.